guys, welcome back to my channel. It's Jasmine. I'm going to try to redo this because I keep stumbling over my words, but this is going to be, and hopefully we have enough camera battery. My camera's been screwing up on me all day, but this is going to be a video response, excuse me, to a topic that's been going around in the last couple weeks about the Book of Shadows, or Book of Mirrors, and whatever you want to call it, and the importance of the Book of Shadows. I don't necessarily call it a Book of Mirrors or anything like that. I used to have two Books of Shadows, but I called one my Book of Shadows, and that was my correspondences, my basically more factual, which that's arguable, but more factual information, just correspondences, meanings of things, like the rune meanings, color correspondences, things like that. And then in my other book, which I don't actually call it a Book of Mirrors, and I've never heard that term before, but I really like it, I actually call that one my grimoire. And that one had my meditations that I felt were important, spell work that I did, ritual that I did, and anything like that, and usually the kind of artsy things like the poems, the Charge of the God and the Charge of the Goddess, and things like that, or quotes that I came upon that I liked. Is more like a spiritual journal one. But this was my grimoire, and then this was my Book of Shadows. And I find it to be a little bit cumbersome to have two now that I've actually done it, and I think I got a little too focused on the organizational aspects and not actually what the Book of Shadows is about, which is in my opinion, it's like your own personal little store of information. It's your own book that you can, if you had one witchy book that you were to look for, or if you were going to be stranded on a desert island and you could only bring one witchy book, it would have to be your Book of Shadows. That kind of encompasses the concept of the Book of Shadows to me. It's the one book that you need. If your house is going to burn and you can only save one thing, one book, you want to save your Book of Shadows. So that's what I try to do, is put everything that I think I will use or need, not necessarily way out in the future, but something that I could, if I were to lose everything, I could have that one book, and then if I forget something, I can go right to it in my book, and then later on I can fill it back in with other books. This is the Book of Shadows I'm currently working on right now. If you want to see kind of a tutorial on how I made this book, then hit the like button below or give me a comment. This is what I'm working on right now. I'll just give you a quick open to a couple pages if I can. Well, not a blank page. But yeah, that's what I'm working on right now. So now, as far as the Book of Shadows goes, and as far as the importance of the Book of Shadows, in my opinion, and I'm not trying to knock anybody else that may have said it's not necessarily that important to them. They may have a different style of doing things than I do. But in my opinion, the Book of Shadows is arguably the most important tool to a witch, specifically. Maybe if you are more of a religious or spiritual practitioner and you don't do a whole lot of witchcraft, then maybe the Book of Shadows is something that you could just throw out the door, and you could just have a journal, like a grimoire or a Book of Shadows, to track your progress, or if you don't even need that, then go ahead. But in my practice specifically, because I do practice a lot of witchcraft, the Book of Shadows is my most important tool. If I could only have one tool, it would be my Book of Shadows. And that is because I have books upon books upon books upon books. I've got an 8-foot by 5-foot shelf so full of books that I can't really cram any more in, but I keep buying them. And it does become quite cumbersome. I like the way that Moonlit Opal put it. If you haven't seen her video, check that one out. But it's kind of ridiculous to sit here and pick up one of your favorite books. For example, one of mine is Wicca for One, The Path of Solitary Witchcraft by Raymond Buckland. It can become a little bit ridiculous to flip through this book every time you need something. So what I do is, when I purchase a book, I will go through and read it, and as I come to things, I will dog-ear the page of something that I would like to write in my Book of Shadows, something that I would like to remember, and I know that I'm going to come back to it later for some reason, whether it be a correspondence or something like that. I also sometimes will go through and I don't know if you can see or not, but I will underline or highlight things that are specifically important, so that way if I have to come back to this book, then I can just look for the colors or look for the dog ears, and I know in general where the bits and pieces are. But I still have this book if I want to go back and read the full chapter or whatever, if I feel like I need a pickup. One thing that, again, Mootler Nopal said in her video that I really liked was that she said she writes down, for example, a lot of the herbs and stones and crystals and things like that can become very cumbersome to try to write them all down in your Book of Shadows. And there are certain things, like, for example, a crystal that I'm never personally probably going to work with for crystal healing purposes or anything like that would be like a diamond, because it is so ridiculously expensive, or something to that effect, or a chunk of gold. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I'm not just going to have a chunk of gold laying around. So I don't need to write that down. But one thing I do differently than her, and probably several other people as well, is that I not only do not write things I'm probably not going to use, I don't write down things that I don't have in my possession. So, for example, I'll have a book, like I've got a book over there that's got all kinds of crystals and things like that in it, but in my Book of Shadows, every time I get a new crystal, I flip to the page that is crystals, and I write that crystal down and any meanings or correspondences that I want to go with that crystal. So let's see. In my original book, I have 2 pages of crystals to start out with, and these were just, it took me months to get all of these crystals. And I've got anything possible that you could, I mean, I've got a whole freaking paragraph just on ametrine, but I have quite a bit of ametrine, so I know I'm going to use it. Well, then later on, I actually made a purchase from several different crystal shops, and I had to flip, probably 4 or 5 pages later in the book and start a new page for crystals, so that then, like for example, this page only has 3 or 4 crystals on it. So then if I get a new crystal, then I can come back and write that down. I don't ever write anything that I may get in the future, because I don't know if I'm ever going to get it, and I feel like that's a waste of space. So that's a big time saver. And if you are somebody that's feeling like maybe the Book of Shadows is becoming a little bit too cumbersome for you, or you feel like you're writing down too much, as far as correspondences go with crystals and herbs and things like that, only write down what you have. I even go as far as, if I'm planning on planting things, like last year I planted like 8 different herbs, I did not write those down. I don't write them down until I harvest them and dry them out, because I know that something could happen and half of those plants could die, and then I've got it written down, but I don't actually have any of it to use. And then when I'm planning out a spell or good luck charm or something like that, and I'm going through looking for things that correspond with that, and I see that, say, lavender corresponds with that, but I don't have any lavender, then that just aggravates me, because I think I have it, but I don't. So I only write down things I have on hand. And then as far as other correspondences, if it is something like, let me find something, the Celtic tree calendar. I actually follow the Celtic calendar for the most part, the Celtic wheel of the year, and I draw very heavily upon Celtic influences, so that is something that's very important to me, so I want to write the entire thing out. Now, astrology, I actually have very little on astrology in my Book of Shadows, because it's not something that I use on a daily basis. I'm just not really that into it, and that's okay. So I don't have a whole lot of that in my Book of Shadows. If I ever need it, or if I ever want information on it, then I can pull out one of my books, like Wicca for one has a little bit of information about astrology. The Green Witchcraft books have a little bit more, but they've got more on herbs. But I do have a book somewhere that's got a bunch of astrology stuff in it, and I would take that from there. But as I said, my Book of Shadows is arguably the tool that I use the most. And there was another topic thrown into the mix about the Book of Shadows on kind of the arguments for handwritten or typewritten. Personally, I have had a Book of Shadows that I've typewritten. I don't remember a damn thing that was in that book. I remember printing everything out, but I don't remember anything that was in it. My computer crashed, I lost it, it was gone, because I had already thrown papers out of the Book of Shadows and everything else, and I was going to print it out and make it new, and then my computer crashed and I lost it all. But another reason that I handwrite everything in my Book of Shadows, besides the whole, information being lost and things like that, is solely because there's been several scientific studies that show how you learn and how you memorize things. And in my opinion, I don't want to have to go to my Book of Shadows every time I want to do something. I don't want to have to go flip through 7 books if I don't have my Book of Shadows to figure out correspondences for a spell or a ritual bath or an incense or something like that. I want to be able to pull it from memory on the fly, because I do a lot of magic on the fly. I think Moonlit Opal said something about that too. The more senses that you can combine into repeating something, I'll just say, you'll understand in a minute, the easier it is for your brain to memorize it, the more senses that you cover. So for example, if you can read something and see it, if you can say something out loud, speak it and hear it, if you can write it, so that would be kinesthetic or physical learning, that's 1, 2, 3, 4 senses out of the 5. I don't expect you to, speaking isn't necessarily one of them, but that has to do with your mouth, so that can be considered taste. Don't go lick your Book of Shadows. And smell, not necessarily, unless you've got like scented ink or something. But either way, you've knocked out 3, if 4 of the senses, and that is going to be a lot more beneficial to you than just seeing something and typing it, because that's only incorporating your visual sense. You could argue that it is your kinesthetic sense as well because you're typing it, but you're going so fast, in my opinion, your brain doesn't have time to compute it. Pardon the pun, but I write everything. And when I write it and I transcribe it out of a book, after I'm done with the book, and I've got everything dog-eared or highlighted or underlined or whatever, and I go to write it in my Book of Shadows, I read it out of the book, the sentence. I just go, point by point. I don't try to do a whole paragraph or anything, but point by point, and as I'm writing it, I will say it out loud, even if I'm just mumbling it under my breath. And that allows me to memorize a lot better. There are a lot of correspondences that I can pull right out of my head. There are a lot that I can't because I don't use them as often. For example, one of the herbs that I use the most is basil. I can see every correspondence for basil ever right now. I'm not going to, but I could. And that's because I use it so much, and every time I go back and look at it, and I read it to find the correspondence that I'm looking for, I read it out loud, so that not only am I seeing it and speaking it, I'm also hearing it. And that reinforces it in my head. And that could arguably be another importance of the Book of Shadows. It's literally just a tool for memorization, because you are reading something and writing it and possibly speaking it. And then finally, the last point that I wanted to go over was how long it takes. And yes, a lot of people are very artsy and they like to make their Book of Shadows look good, me included. I don't want to flip through something where I can't even read my handwriting and it's all crammed together and everything else. Now, I'm not saying that I would do that, but or that a plain one is necessarily better than a decorated one, because I do decorate mine. For example, I've got pictures next to all of the tools. I've got a diagram for the phases of the moon, and I've colored it. And that's just because a lot of times for me, color and pictures are things that allow me to also better memorize things, because I'm a very right-minded individual, and I remember things by pictures. I have a photographic memory. So if I have a picture to go with something, I remember it better. So the time aspect, for me, doesn't have anything to do with how decorative the Book of Shadows is. The time aspect for me is taking the time out of my day to sit down and write it, or draw it, or whatever. I don't have a problem spending 2 hours drawing a picture in it. It's just finding the 2 hours to draw the picture. And the way I usually do it is, like I said, right now I'm working on transcribing these books, my notebooks, into my new leather-bound Book of Shadows. And the way I do that is literally when I'm just sitting around and I don't have anything to do, just once a week, maybe just an hour a week, I will set some time aside and get some tea or a pop or whatever and maybe a snack and just sit and write and transcribe. And then when I get tired of it, I quit. I don't do anymore until I feel like doing it. Don't ever make it a chore. And in my opinion, you shouldn't schedule spirituality. So I don't schedule it. I just, whenever I feel like writing in my Book of Shadows, I write in my Book of Shadows. And then it doesn't become a problem of time because I'm choosing to take that time out to do it. And then also, as far as reading the books go and then transcribing things out of books, I don't write anything in my Book of Shadows until I'm completely done with the book. I read the book whenever I want, and then I'll leave it alone until I decide I want to put some of that information into my Book of Shadows now, one of the days that I decide to. And then I will go through and find the pages that I've dog-eared, and I will read that entire page and figure out what I want to pull out of that page, or if I've underlined, then I'll just, or sometimes I draw little boxes around things, I'll find those. Then I will find where I want to put them in my Book of Shadows because I have everything organized, and then I will transcribe it. Sometimes I even maybe I'll flip from here in the book all the way back to here, and then I'll go somewhere in the middle, and then I'll go back over here, and then I'll go way to the front of the book. You don't have to go linear when you are writing information down out of the book into your Book of Shadows. The only time you have to go linear is when you're reading it. So that can help save some time too. And if you are trying to decide whether or not to start a Book of Shadows, I highly, highly, highly encourage that you do. As I said, it doesn't have to be a time-consuming thing, and it doesn't have to be boring and cumbersome and everything else. It can be just a fun, relaxing evening. I've even written in my Book of Shadows in the freaking bathtub. I mean, if you're going to sit in there for an hour anyway, you might as well do something, or at least read a book in the bathtub, which I do a lot. And then you can bring a pen in with you, and I'll underline the things. And then later on, when I go to write my Book of Shadows, I can pull the book out since I've already underlined it and go ahead and write it down. And then it doesn't become as much of a chore to read through this whole book page by page, and then when I get to page 6 I see something I like, so I write it down, and then when I get to page 12, and then when I get to page 23, and then just read the whole thing, dog-ear the pages or bookmark them or sticky note them or whatever, and then go back later and transcribe it. So that might help you save a little bit of time. Maybe I might do a Book of Shadows flip through as soon as I'm done transcribing all this information, but as I said, I don't schedule it, so I don't know when that's going to be. But if you would like to see that, click the thumbs up button or leave me a comment below, and I'll show you my whole Book of Shadows. I actually have a little bit of a flip through over on my other channel, which is youtube.com/theboundlesspath. I'll leave a link to that below if you want to see my old Book of Shadows and a little bit of my new one. But yeah, I think that's all I have to say about the Book of Shadows. Like I said, if you want to give me your opinion about how important the Book of Shadows is, or how you do yours, or how you find time to do yours, do you schedule time to write in your Book of Shadows? I'd love to know. Let me know in the comments. Make me a video response. If you've done a video on this topic, link me to it down in the comments below. And thanks again for listening. I hope this video wasn't too long. See you next time. Blessed be.